All right. Hello, guys. I'm sorry I'm not able to be there with you today, but through the wonder of pre-recorded lectures, I am able to be with you. And it's good because I want to kind of wrap up our modern China unit today by talking about something that I think is very important and that I think is all very important for you all to be aware of. And that is this idea of censorship, especially as it pertains to censorship in China. Now, we have been talking for the last several days about communism in China. So by now, we understand how the Communist Party came to be in China, sort of what their core beliefs are, what they stand for. And now, since the Communist Party is very much still in charge in China, under the leadership of Xi Jinping, pictured here, of course, then I want you guys to sort of has a sense of understanding what that means in terms of life for the average Chinese citizen. And a good way to understand that is to understand this idea of censorship. Censorship in China is a huge factor of the day to day lives of a Chinese citizen, and it all comes down to the communists who are in charge of the country. So let's go ahead and go through this. How class is going to go today is I'm going to talk through these slides, and then there are going to be some discussion questions at the end that I'm going to have the substitute lead you through. And I would really love for you guys to share your thoughts on this because it's a topic that, as young people growing up in a world, increasingly interconnected world, where the influence of China, the influence of America are sort of coming up against one another in this global marketplace of ideas, which is mostly playing out on the internet, it will affect you if it has not already. So let's go ahead and get into things. So, first of all, what is censorship? We can't really talk about something if we don't understand what it is, so let's go ahead and define the term. Censorship is when a group in power blocks or removes information that it considers to be unacceptable or dangerous. The goal of censorship is to limit the spread of ideas and to subtly control what people think. So it is easiest to understand it by looking at some examples. So let's go ahead and do that now. Censorship in America, it exists, but it is not the same as what we're going to talk about in China and what we're going to see when you guys watch the short video about censorship in China. However, it does exist. It takes a few different forms. In America, we have this wonderful, amazing thing baked right into our Constitution. Many of you have heard of it. All of you have heard of it. Hopefully, we've talked about it many times in class, called the First Amendment. The First Amendment protects a lot of things, including this freedom of speech. And I want to make one really important point about the First Amendment. It and you'll talk about this more next year when you take U.S. history, but the First Amendment protects rights that you were born with. You were born with the freedom of speech. You were born with the freedom of religion. The First Amendment does not give you the freedom of speech. You already had the freedom of speech. You were born with it. What the First Amendment does is it prevents the government, the American government, from taking that God given right away from you. So I'm going to repeat that because it's a really important thing to understand. The First Amendment does not give you freedom of speech. You already had freedom of speech. What the First Amendment does is it prevents the government from taking away something that you already had, whether it's freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, that kind of thing. Important distinction. Thanks to the wonderful, wonderful First Amendment, censorship in America by the government, is rare. It used to be more common back in the earlier times of America, the earlier stages of America, especially during the Civil War era and the Civil Rights Movement in the mid 1900s. There was a lot of censorship in the South when it came to racial issues. But overall, in today's America, censorship by the government is pretty rare, simply because it's illegal, thanks to the First Amendment, for the government to censor most things. However, and this is a really important point, The First Amendment only stops the government from censoring things and does not stop independent companies from censoring things. That happens all the time. Here I have a couple examples. This is Twitter, which of course is now called X, which kind of ties in with all this. And Twitter slash X is free to censor its own platform. Donald Trump in 2021 famously was kicked off Twitter. That was a form of censorship. Donald Trump was being censored by Twitter because of some things that he had tweeted out. Now, recently, Twitter, not recently, I guess within the last few years, Twitter was bought by Elon Musk, who we seem to be talking about a lot in class lately, and it was turned into X. And one of the things that Elon Musk said he was going to do when he bought Twitter and turned it into X was to basically have it stop censoring things, open up the platform, free up the platform, limit the censorship on the platform. And because of that, Donald Trump is back on. He's back tweeting or Xing or whatever it is now. And so they've really limited their censorship. Another example here. This is a show called South Park. Many of you have heard of it. Many of you have watched it. I have mixed feelings about that, but you're going to watch it anyway, regardless of what your social studies teacher thinks, even if it's not necessarily a show for 12 and 13-year-olds. But what are you going to do? And this is a example of censorship in action. Back in the 1990s, South Park aired an episode depicting the prophet of the Muslim religion, Muhammad. And that is incredibly offensive to Muslims. They consider the depiction of the prophet Muhammad incredible sin, something that is incredibly offensive and should never be done. And in the years following that episode, many Muslims were very upset. And South Park, being South Park, actually made a whole episode about the fact that an older one of their episodes was censored. So here we have a lot of religious figures. We have Jesus, we have, I think it's Krishna from the Hindu religion, Buddha, Joseph Smith from the Mormon religion. And here, under the censored bar, is supposed to be the Prophet Muhammad. Now, it's interesting because if you go on the streaming service where South Park airs, the episode where Muhammad was originally depicted is no longer available. It has been censored. It has been removed from the platform. An example of censorship in action. Another interesting example of censorship that I'm going to go ahead and share with you guys. One of my favorite games, Magic the Gathering, I've talked about it a lot. The world's greatest and most popular card game has had some censorship of its own. And what they've done is they've engaged in what's called self-censorship, where they have chosen to censor their own material so as not to offend certain groups of people. Let's take a look at what I mean. There is a card called Jihad. And if we go on the website here, it says this card does not meet Magic community standards. It may perpetuate racism, contain harmful stereotypes, or depict a sensitive real-world event. Okay. Here's why. It depicts Muslims, again, actual real-life events, and so that is why they have chosen to engage in this self-censorship of this card, because they don't want to offend people, basically. Fine. I don't want to just, be picking on Muslims here. So let's go ahead and look at another card. Oh, there's a bunch. Okay, hang on. Let's do it this way. Here we go. Okay. Same thing. This card, it was also censored, and it's called Crusade, and it depicts real-life Christian troops. So they did not want to offend Muslims. They did not want to offend Christians. So they have engaged in self-censorship with these cards. Maybe a better example is an older card where we can see censorship in action. This was a card printed way back in 1993 called Unholy Strength, and on it, it depicts what is usually considered to be a satanic symbol, a pentagram. This was deemed very offensive, and it really angered a lot of Christian groups back in the day. I'm sure you can imagine why. So what the company that owns Magic the Gathering, a company called Wizards of the Coast, did was in future printings of the card, they removed the pentagram. Here we can actually see it side by side. Here's the original with the pentagram in the background, and here is the censored version with the pentagram taken out. Uncensored, censored. Again, this is an example of self-censorship by Wizards of the Coast. Another example, same company. Any of you have seen the show Stranger Things, maybe are familiar with the game Dungeons and Dragons. And Dungeons and Dragons also had to deal with some censorship issues because groups were angered by depictions of devils in their game. In the 1970s, let's see if we do Satanic Panic. Yep, there's good old Eddie Munson. So if you've seen the newest episode or the newest season of Stranger Things, they talk about this a lot, where again Christian groups were very upset by the depiction of devils in the game Dungeons and Dragons, and so what the company actually did was they removed devils from their game. They called them something else. They started to refer to them by some totally made up name, and so that was another example of self censorship. So that sort of was a way to get around any blowback or repercussions that they might have had from angering Christian groups. Interestingly enough, if we look at, again, same company, cards printed today, let's just take a look here, just out of curiosity, see if devils are still being censored. No, they are not. Devils show up all the time in artwork from this company, whether it's in Dungeons and Dragons or Magic the Gathering, and so we can see they are no longer engaging in this type of self-censorship. Instead, the kind of self-censorship that they are engaging in now has to do with not angering certain groups of people. So this card, Pradesh Gypsies. Gypsies are an ethnic group, and they do not want to depict real life ethnic groups anymore because they do not want to offend anybody, and so they have decided to censor some of these cards. We talked about Dr. Seuss earlier this year and how some of his books were censored for much of the same reasons. They've been taken off shelves, and that's an example of censorship here in America. Is this idea of certain books being removed from shelves because they're deemed offensive. That is probably one of the more common types of censorship that we see here in America. Because of what they deem to be offensive depictions of Chinese people or African people, they have decided to remove, and by they, it's not the government. Again, it's not the government. It's individual libraries, individual schools choosing to remove these books from their shelves because they do not want to offend anybody. They are engaging in censorship. Censorship. This idea of removing information that is considered unacceptable or dangerous to limit the spread of ideas and subtly control what people think. Okay? So that is about as far as censorship goes in America these days. And as we're about to see, it is absolutely nothing compared to what is happening in China. Good example. 1989, June 4th, 1989, hundreds of civilians in the Chinese capital of Beijing were killed by government forces while protesting against the communist government. This came to be known as the Tiananmen Square Massacre. What they were doing is it was college students, and they were protesting against the communist government, and they were trying to protest in favor of democracy. They wanted China to adopt democracy like we have here in the United States. China wasn't having that, and they decided to put the protest down forcefully. And as a result, they sent in the army, they sent in police, and hundreds of civilians were killed, brutally killed, shot, killed, crushed by tanks in some cases. Horrible, horrible. This event is well known outside of China. We can literally go to Wikipedia and type in, you can get rid of these ads here, type in Tiananmen Square, and then we can click on the link. Here it is. Boom. We can read and learn all about it. Okay? The information is readily available to us. But in China, many people in the country where this actually occurred know next to nothing about the Tiananmen Square massacre due to government censorship. The government does not want its own people to know what happened. This image here became known as Tank Man. In the foreground here, we see one man with some shopping bags, look like he's just on his way back from the store, standing in front of a row of tanks. And actually, interestingly enough, this is not even the full image. This is the full image. So we can see that the row of tanks stretched all the way back. You can really see the scale of this government crackdown. And no one knows who Tank Man is. His identity, as far as I'm aware, is still a mystery, but he's sort of become a symbol of standing up against government oppression. However, if you lived in China, you've probably never seen this image, even though it happened in Beijing, the capital of China, because it's been censored by the government. The government has done everything they can to crack down, to make sure that this information and a lot of other stuff like it that would reflect poorly on the communist government in China is not available to its own people. They censor all this information on the internet and elsewhere so that nobody knows about it. Nobody can learn about it. And if nobody can learn about something like this, then nobody can use it as an inspiration. Nobody can be inspired by Tank Man in China, inspired by his bravery and strength standing up to a row of tanks if they've never heard about it. And that's the whole point of censorship, guys. If people never learn about things, if people are not exposed to new and so-called dangerous ideas, then those ideas don't spread, those ideas don't grow. That's the real point of censorship. That's why governments like China do it. So censorship in China goes far, far beyond anything we see here in America. Movies, television, newspapers, the entire internet is censored one way or another. Everything must be approved by the communist government before it can be seen by the eyeballs of any civilians living in China. And this also means that the government is always watching. You can't censor something if you aren't aware of it. And so the government is constantly monitoring all the internet traffic in China, which the video you'll watch we'll talk more about. And I would be a failure of a social studies teacher if I didn't point out that that's probably happening here in America too. The government, if they want to, is pretty much watching everything we do on the internet. It's not a person watching it, it's computers and AI watching it, but it is happening. The difference is that it's not censored here in America. It is censored in China. Big difference there. So that is sort of the basics. And now I want you guys to watch a video which goes into a lot more detail, especially about how the internet is censored in China. Before you do, I'm going to leave with this. Your thoughts on this? I'm going to open this up to the discussion. I'll have the substitute lead you guys through it, and I really do want you guys to share your thoughts. Have you ever encountered censorship in your life? Have maybe you ever felt like you've been censored, whether it's by the school or maybe by some other group in power? Have you maybe not been able to have your voice heard? Have you ever been banned from a website, for example, for something you posted or something you said? Okay, censorship. It happens. Do you ever think there are cases where censorship can be good? Maybe. Maybe some of those examples we looked at with Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons. Maybe sometimes it's good to engage in self-censorship, to avoid offending certain groups. Okay? Maybe we should be careful about what we say. Maybe we should, maybe certain things are not okay. Maybe censorship can sometimes be a force for good. Your thoughts on that? And then finally, does censorship even work? Or will people always find ways around it? People in China are certainly finding ways around their own government censorship. Can it even backfire? Can censoring something cause people to seek it out even more? If you hear like, oh, I heard that, this book got pulled from shelves, or, oh, I heard this episode got taken off the streaming service, is that just going to make people seek it out even more, thus completely eliminating the whole point of censoring it in the first place? So I want to have you guys share your thoughts on that. And now I'm going to end this recording. I will be back tomorrow. We're going to decorate the Christmas tree. Again, I apologize for not being able to be there in person, but I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. And we will continue on from there. All right. Enjoy the video, guys. Pay attention. It has a lot of really good information. Afterwards, there's going to be a few more discussion questions, and your wonderful substitute, will be able to take it from there. All right. Thank you, guys, and I will see you all tomorrow.